for doing this. Let Lily also come in. Let me thank her also. Maybe we can start there. Lily, please, we're waiting for you. The world is waiting for you, Lily.
Hello, hello, good morning, good evening.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. I'll introduce everyone after we just started. The format now is that Mark suggested the topic. Now he's going to tell us about the conference. Please, Mark, tell us about the conference, and then we'll end the topic, and then we'll move from there.
So thank you, Vikram. This conference is now, I believe, the third in a series. And each of the symposia that happened previously had amazing speakers who, from around the world, talking about mediation. In this particular conference, the Dispute Resolution Revolution Conference, World Mediators Conference, Mediation Vision 2026. We're talking about mediation in multiple different contexts, and our presentation today will focus on the very popular theory and practice of nonviolent communication, NVC, and mediation.
Perfect. Anything, Stacey, something to add to this, what Mark said about the conference? Look, the conference, I'm more, of course, interested to how people are perceiving the conference. I mean, it's good for me. It's a learning experience, so that for the next time. So what are you saying, Stacey, about the conference? Anything that you want to add?
I really love how it feels open source, how everyone can come and share their practices and their hopes and their different ideas to get us thinking different ways. And that the content is available for later, so we can watch it if we can't watch it in real time.
Perfect. Lily, anything to add?
I would just say that it's been, I've shared this with you, a wonderful experience for me because I'm not in the practice of mediating. So with all the stuff going on in the world and really even in my own family, it can feel very disconnecting. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes it can seem a little devastating and hopeless. But meeting all these people, and as Stacey said, I've watched different videos. I'm really enjoying that. I'm taking copious notes, and it makes me feel hopeful and very connected that there is a community worldwide, even if it's not here in my neighborhood, although it probably is, but I haven't met those people. So you have opened this door for us to meet each other. And also, as Stacey said, really to learn, to grow. And mostly for me, it's feeling connected and hopeful that there are people that also see things in a way that will be helpful in our present circumstances. And we could move forward with these sorts of tools. That's how I feel.
Perfect.
So thank you for doing
it. Thank you for being part of it. Of course, I had to force you into it. I will always say that, Lily. I had to force you into it. Otherwise, you would not be here. You would just say, no, I'm not a mediator. I don't want to go get into this. So good you came in. But Vidyas, did you manage to see any of the sessions?
Who did you ask that
Vidyas.
to?
I was asking Vidyas, is he going to unmute himself? Vidyas?
I've been following the post in the Facebook and also seeing a little bit in the YouTube. This is a really amazing effort, I think, bringing people all across the world together on some very, very important dimensions and ideas of mediation. So I think it is something very interesting because all of us are learning new things from all these interactions and this whole conference that we are going through. So I think really it's a great learning experience for each one of us.
And for Vidyas, we said a very nice thing today. He said, well, let's make it into a publication. All these things, all these thoughts from people all over the world, let's put it down. So that we're going to start working on that. So that will happen. So, okay. So basically, non-violent communication and mediation. So Mark, you'll have to take the lead. And of course, you'll have to introduce yourself. And let's do the introductions first. Then Mark, please tell us about yourself. Then we'll go around and then, then we'll start on the topic.
Okay, so for me, it's morning here in Connecticut, East Coast, USA. I've been involved in mediation since I started back in the late 1970s in the court system in Connecticut. Been practicing law since mid-80s and practicing mediation throughout my entire career. I've been teaching law students at Quinnipiac University about other various forms of dispute resolution, including mediation. And within recent years, I've focused my practice primarily on non-adversarial practices. So whether it's mediation or collaborative practice, that's what I've been focused on. And my main subject area, my primary focus is family matters, family law, whether it's divorce, separation, child custody, and so forth. And I've been really enjoying this conference immensely. So thank you, Vikram.
Perfect. Stacey, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, it's morning for me also. I'm on the west coast of the US in Southern California. I am working in a small consulting firm that helps with alternative dispute resolution on the front end, hopefully resolving things before they get too big, but can also come in for mediations and things like that. I come through this from actually being a parent volunteer in my children's schools and seeing a lot of need and getting into mediation and facilitation through my local public schools. And I did hold a job for a few years in training college students to work with preschools. And that's where I heard about nonviolent communication and where I use some of that. So I'm super excited about the topic today.
And the good thing is, Stacey got together people. We had a discussion on ombuds and versus mediators. It was a very nice discussion, which was supposed to be an hour, went on for 2 hours. And I think it was quite helpful. Of course, we'll continue the conversation. So with Vyas, please.
Thank you, Vikram. And it's really wonderful. I really look forward to listening to all of you in this session. I'm Vedavyas Kundu. I'm from New Delhi. I work in a place which is the National Memorial of Mahatma Gandhi. I am doing a lot of work vis-a-vis nonviolent communication. And in fact, I've been able to put together different courses on nonviolent communication, which are not just going across India, but also it has a major global traction, whether in different countries of Africa or even places like Spain and all. Here, essentially, I would like to point out that I am mostly promoting or focusing on the Gandhian approach to nonviolent communication. And in fact, I've done a lot of work on this issue of nonviolent communication and mediation, and in fact, presently helping one of our common colleague, which as Vikram suggested, we plan to put together this whole publication. So this lawyer from Chandigarh, she is doing a PhD on mediation and nonviolent communication. So that is actually helping me to learn more while helping and aiding this research scholar on the PhD of mediation and nonviolent communication. And I really look forward to understanding, have a greater understanding of the issue from all of you, and we're looking forward to some really good, meaningful, constructive discussions here. Thank you very much.
What you didn't get from that is that he works with for the Ministry of Culture, the government of India, and this aspect of the Gandhi, called the Gandhi Smriti and the Darshan Samiti. Smriti means remembering, and he'll tell us exactly the translation, but it's a kind of a memorial, like he said, for Mahatma Gandhi. So we have that. So he's part of the Ministry of Culture. And of course, he's arranged a very nice discussion with me, with some teachers from one rural part of India. And then, of course, telling them about mediation and how there are people out there who are actually mediators sitting there doing everything. So the identification of the mediator mindset. So we kind of did one session there. Yes, Lily, please.
So
You've come in last because you came in last. Okay, so that's the order here.
So really, my journey of the whole mediation thing began with Marshall Rosenberg. Somebody told me about him. He would speak every year at the university in Santa Barbara, which is about an hour and a half from me. I was just completely amazed with his concepts. I had never really heard of any of this, the idea that we could observe our own and others' feelings and needs and move forward communicating those. I was so taken with him, I ended up taking an 8-week course. And then every year I would get as many family members or friends to go with me to the university to hear him speak. And I think I got to hear him speak 6 or 7 times before he passed away in 2015, I believe it was. So he had a positive impact on my life. And I've continued that with, as I told you, I was trained with numerous nonprofits in the area that I live in. although I am not a professional mediator, I've continued the mediator mindset, as you call it, Vikram, and try to practice these things in my own life and then use them in my various jobs to help create connection, really. So that's sort of my story on that.
Perfect. So what we do is, Mark, we'll just generally just go through what non-violent communication means to each of you. We just do that round and then we'll take it from there. Yes, Mark, do you want to
Great.
tell
Okay,
us what?
so
Yeah.
I'm very interested to hear about the memorial efforts related to Mahatma Gandhi, because the foreword to Marshall Rosenberg's book, which is entitled Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life, was written by Gandhi's grandchild, Arun Gandhi, and very clear description of how that particular person was exposed early in life to discrimination and so forth, and how the work of nonviolent communication that's set forth in Marshall Rosenberg's book really helped to adjust and address those kinds of things. And so I thought that that maybe in my discussion that I would talk about two different kind of contexts for NVC, nonviolent communication. One is to kind of map out the basic approach. And then the other, as I was preparing for today, I went back over and I listened to Ken Cloke's first talk at the beginning of the first symposium. And I noticed that there were some very explicit skills that Ken described, which are nearly identical to some of the skills that are set forth in Marshall Rosenberg's process of nonviolent communication. And simultaneously, as I was looking at my notes from Henry Yampolsky, whose brand new book, Dissolving Conflict, also maps a number of the very same approaches to conflict that is set forth not only by Ken, but also by Rosenberg in his book. And one of the things I thought I would start with is Ken's note when he mentioned that conflict exists within cultures. And when he was talking about conflict and culture, he said there were two specific things that he suggested. One of them for identifying ways to strengthen culture is first to build skills in being able to handle difficult behavior that might result in impasse. And secondly, discouraging activities that perpetuate conflict. And as I thought about that comment, I really felt that this particular session today is really about skills. It's about some of the specific things that are being suggested by the various presenters here and by Marshall Rosenberg and the practitioners of nonviolent communication throughout the world in terms of how to deal with conflict. So the first part, therefore, would be just sort of describing the method, the process of NVC. And what Marshall Rosenberg basically has described is a process that begins with observing without judging. And part of the reason why he is so focused on that specific aspect when we are in the midst of conflict, maybe somebody says something that's hostile toward us or insulting or otherwise, if we observe what it is that is happening without placing that extra judgmental, evaluative frame on it, then we are more likely, when we're dealing with the feelings that are arising within us, maybe it's a feeling of being insulted, or a feeling of being perhaps afraid if somebody's angry. We can begin by saying, well, my feelings are really not the result of what that other person did. My feelings are the result of what I'm saying to myself about what that person did. And so the idea is to observe, but to separate what I say to myself about it, my judgment about it, my evaluation about it, from that very observation. The reason why he's suggesting that is because he's basically suggesting throughout this entire process that our judgment is really the sort of the root of violence. And I'll mention again, Henry Yampolsky has something very similar to say. So if we can start with observing without judging, observing without laying that sort of evaluative statement of this person is wrong, or this person is bad, or this person caused my feelings. What Marshall's really saying is that person doesn't cause your feelings. Your feelings are the result of your own description to yourself of the judgment you've made about that person. So if we can do that, sort of in a sense, he says, stop and take a breath before responding, and realize that the cause is not the other person, but the cause is what we are saying to ourselves. We are basically separating that sort of stimulus and separating it from our thinking. And we are essentially then able to go to the next step, which is to identify that beneath the feelings that we're feeling, whatever they may be, there's actually certain needs, maybe values, if you want to use that word, that are actually at the root of our feelings. And one of the wonderful things that I found in a YouTube video of Rosenberg's, where he talked about the word emotion. He said motion, the part of the word emotion in the word emotion is that it's pointing us, moving us toward the needs that are underlying the feelings within the emotion. And so the fascinating part of this entire process to me is that when you get past the initial sense of what is really causing your feelings, and it's actually maybe yourself, and you're actually then looking deeper into what's beneath those feelings, we're uncovering needs that, according to Marshall and many of the other speakers in this symposium, have said, we all share certain fundamental needs. Indeed, those needs are shared by everyone. And so the idea is for us to be able to focus in on what are the needs that are really driving here? What are the needs that our emotions are pointing us to? And at some point, when we've done that transformation of our emotions into our needs, we could then speak from the level of the need that we feel is being frustrated, or the need that we need to have met, or the need that we want to have recognized, instead of our judgmental evaluation. So you can imagine if you didn't do that process and you said, you are causing me to feel this way, the person undoubtedly that you're speaking to is going to feel defensive. On the other hand, if you could formulate a statement or a reaction, or perhaps, as Marshall says, a request from the standpoint of the needs that are underlying these emotions, you can actually increase the possibility that you will be received, what you say will be received empathically, as opposed to defensively or even violently. And so sort of this first phase of the process, and he's talking about communication, of course, so it's a two-way street. This first phase is, how do we express ourselves when we are feeling a certain strong emotion? So let's move into the second phase. The second phase is, well, we are dealing with another person. So one of the things that Marshall Rosenberg also said in that YouTube video that I looked at was that if we have gone through this process of making this shift or this transformation from our feelings to our needs, what we would then do is actually make a request of the other person to address what it is that the need that's being unmet. But he said maybe another approach would be, instead of opening your mouth, as he says, maybe we should stop there and actually turn to the other person and perhaps address that other person from the standpoint of what we have heard that person say, and look at what might be underlying in that person's portrayal of what it is that they said, or that person's words. Perhaps there's some underlying emotion and underlying need that has caused that particular person to make that statement or to attack us in a particular way. And so we're really talking about developing a dialogue where we are both, on the one hand, expressing, and on the other hand, receiving. And each side in the equation, the speaker and the receiver, are really coming from those same basic places where you have the sort of the stimulus that might be the first outward thing, the underlying thoughts about what's being said, the feelings about that, and then the needs underlying it. And eventually you get to the point where you can make a request from the standpoint of needs, or you could possibly look to the other person who's speaking, or who's the one who might be presenting to you as, what might be the need underlying that person's particular request. So he talks about receiving empathically. And what we're really talking about here is a shift from an outward description of what's causing us to feel a particular way to an inward analysis of, we are sort of, in a sense, causing it because of the way we are thinking about it, and we need to get in touch with our needs. So that's really the very first kind of overview that I wanted to describe in terms of the process. And as Lily mentioned in the introductions, this idea of skills is about having tools. And, as much as I've been teaching law students, the one thing I've found that people really need is somewhat of a toolkit, somewhat of a sense of, well, now you're in the conflict, how can you actually sustain that process for the purpose of moving the individuals, if you're the mediator, moving people through the process. Nonviolent communication really offers that type of toolkit, as does some of the work of the folks in Ireland, Jerry O'Sullivan, and certainly Henry M. Kalski and Ken Cloke. So when we talk about skills, I think that one of the most important things we could do is to collect up skills from various sources so that we can improve the number of tools available for mediators. And nonviolent communication is clearly one of the most valuable skills that we can use, because of the way that Marshall Rosenberg and the literally thousands of people around the world have learned to use this process in a very productive way in mediation. So that's sort of the first part of what I would wanted to talk about.
Perfect. That's nice. Stacey, please. Your introduction
to nonviolent communication. For me, it's a step back at the very edge of this pool. And it's a lot about it is having even language for our different emotions and for our different needs that I find lacking. Just don't even like those basic tools to even use the kinds of tools you're talking about, Mark. And I have been so surprised. During COVID, I had a friend who started every day saying, "What's one word for how you feel today?" And I started realizing through that process, I never talk about how I feel. I always talk about an observation or something I'm thinking. And so just those words for feelings and for needs is pretty vital to even understand. So I would love to just be aware of that. And in working with people of all ages, whether it's college students or preschoolers or adults, I think, at least in my context, people have we've been taught that emotions should not affect us and we should be out of our actions. And I think we really do a disservice to ourselves and others, not validating how important, that's part of our thinking is our emotions. They cannot be separated and should not be separated. So to me, that's a really important piece of this conversation.
Perfect. So Vedas, look, he teaches nonviolent communication. They have designed a course on nonviolent communication, and something that people can do from wherever in the world they want to, and they then provide a certificate to that person. Yes, Vedas, you do all that, don't you?
Thank you. It was really wonderful listening to Mark and Lily. And in fact, I just wanted to ask, if I'm not wrong, Mark was referring to our friend Henry Yampolsky, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He happens to be a very good friend of mine. And we are putting a book together on the Gandhian approach to humanistic mediation. So we are working on that. I think it will take another 1.5 to 2 months to finalize the whole manuscript. Well, friends, here, when we are talking about nonviolent communication, to me, nonviolent communication is essentially a holistic communication process. Because essentially, I'm using the the Gandhian approach to non-violent communication, which also focuses on the essence of human interconnectedness. So when we are talking of non-violent communication, we are not just talking of a human-to-human communication, but also our symbolic communication with the nature and the symbolic communication with all other living beings. That is number one. Number two, essentially, when we are talking of non-violent communication, it is essentially means not just our verbal or non-verbal communication, but also our thoughts, ideas, and thoughts and ideas. Because thoughts and ideas are essentially the primary form of communication. So when we are talking of non-violent communication, it also starts from within. That is our intrapersonal communication. And if our intrapersonal communication is not healthy communication, if our intrapersonal communication is having violent communication, so then our outer communication will become dysfunctional or it could become aggressive. So it is so essential when we are talking of non-violent communication that there should be, as the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh had said, peace within and peace in the world. So our intrapersonal communication, our self-talk and inner dialogue also needs to be non-violent in nature. Then the third point talks about the essence of importance of flexibility and openness in our communication process. Because as we see, even from the historical situation, Mahatma Gandhi, even at the height of the India's freedom struggle, he was keeping the channels of communication open with the British Empire. So the flexibility and openness are an important integral part of non-violent communication, and essentially that is again an important aspect of any mediation process, the openness and flexibility in the communication. The next important aspect of the Gandhian approach is the humanization of our communication process. What is happening today in the world is there is so much of aggressiveness, so much of stereotyping, so much of issues. So how to ensure that our communication ecosystem, whether in our families, whether it is in our institutions, the workplace, or the society at large, or at the global level, how we can promote the process of humanization of the communication process. That is again very important. Then, of course, Mark has talked very at length about the essence of non-judgmental communication, which we learned from Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, the importance of the non-evaluative approach, use of non-evaluative language. Also, essentially, when we are talking of the non-violent communication, we are also talking on how some of the altruistic tendencies become an essential part of the communication process. That is the empathy, kindness, uh, issues of compassion, and of course kindness and gratitude. So when these elements become a part of our communication architecture, then it becomes non-violent in nature. It's a non-violent communication. So with all these elements at play, we will realize how important each of these elements are and how each of these elements are interconnected and interwoven, and how each of them can aid in the process of mediation. Because I remember doing this very interesting dialogue with this very senior Australian arbitrator, Mr. Simon Howden, and he was talking in a mediation process. It's all 80% importance of 80% communication. So if our communication of a mediator, the he or she is using or are using the strategies and tools of non-violent communication, so it will help in transformation of the relationship. It will help in transformation of the whole conflict process, and help in bringing that negative emotions which really generally happens in conflict situation, to transform it into the positive one, the negative communication to the positive one. So I think at the starting point, these are the important elements of non-violent communication, and these are how important it can be used. If you see some of these ideas of Mahatma Gandhi's approach to non-violent communication. Also, it is important when the non-violent communication, the communicator rather is basically aiming to go from one plane to the higher plane of human values. That is the humanhood. How we can aim to become better human being. How we can go to the next plane of higher human values. That is the key in his own communication approach. So I think whether we are using the Gandhian approach or Dr. Marshall Rosenberg's approach or the Buddhist communication approach, when we are talking of the mindfulness communication, each of these have highlight the same important point on underlining factor of non-violence in our communication, whether verbal, non-verbal, or our thoughts and ideas. And these are key in helping in the process of mediation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vedvyas. Thing with Vedvyas is because he's used to giving lectures. I just felt, will I need to cut him off? But no, good it happened. But Vedvyas, Henry and I know, of course, Vedvyas' colleague, the Mansi, that we had a good discussion on Mahatma Gandhi and mediation. So, but we do 2 parts of that. Second part, they boycotted the part 2. There were other people in part 2. But watch that. It's those discussions were very nice. So now, Mark, this was, of course, Vedvyas did connect it to mediation, but now you please connect it to mediation. Non-violent communication and mediation now.
So when we look carefully at the process of judgment, and we realize that much of what Gandhi talked about, and much of what Dr. Rosenberg talked about, and indeed what Ken Cloke has talked about and others, is that judgment is really a form of violence. And the idea of judging is to create an us and them. You are judging. And Ken made it very clear, there's no us and them, it's only an us. And what I want to do is I want to focus on what Ken mentioned in his keynote speech in the beginning of the first symposium. The phrase that he started with is, when I begin to form judgment about a person, and this is him speaking as a mediator. I ask myself, what would have had to happen to me to act like that? And he's not asking that question to judge the person. He's asking the question so that he could then create a platform, as he said, for being curious, to inquire of the other person. What does that mean to you? Or how does that feel to you? Or why is this causing you to be so upset or angry? And the whole entire approach that Ken is talking about as a mediator is to use such genuinely curious inquiries, genuinely curious questions, to be with that person. He talks about the fact that he's not necessarily neutral, he's omnipartial. He actually is on the side of everyone. And when he's asking a person, he's asking genuinely to know, what is it that might have caused you to feel that way? And then he also gave another example as a mediator, which is also remarkably similar to what Marshall Rosenberg describes in the process. And so Ken describes that if person number 1 makes a statement and person number 2 hears that statement, and Ken might ask as a mediator to that person, what do you think person number 1 meant? And then that person will respond, and I would guess typically with some type of an evaluative, judgmental description. And Ken would then say to person number 2, would you like to hear what the person meant? And turns to person number 1 and says, is that what you meant? And invariably, the first person will say no. And therefore, the next question is, tell person number 2 what you meant. This back and forth idea is very much consistent with all of the training in nonviolent communication. The objective is to engage in a very, let's say, non-threatening, non-judgmental, and essentially nonviolent conversation where the mediator is actually helping to facilitate each person speaking from the level ultimately of their needs. And I really appreciate Stacy's comment, because I totally agree that we are so conditioned in our upbringings and our education that we don't even really identify what our needs are. We don't speak from the level of emotion. We're often taught to suppress those kinds of things. And yet this is the part that each of these very, very well experienced mediators is telling us is really the essence of what we need to do in mediation, is to allow for the expression of the emotion, because the emotion is pointing us toward a need or moving us toward a need. So from the mediator's perspective, I've seen also some NVC, nonviolent communication trainers and teachers talk about the 3-chair method. So you have the 2 speakers each in a chair, and then the 3rd chair, where the mediator is attempting to engage in this process where there's a genuine request of speaker number 1 to say something, let's say, whatever it may be, but hopefully from the heart. But then to speaker number 2, listener number 2, which is, what did you hear? And then go back and forth to clarify what was said, what was heard, and so forth. So that process is what the mediator is doing in facilitating a dialogue, and the ultimate end of the facilitation is for each of the participants to learn something about the other at the level of the needs that are being unmet, the level of needs that are being, let's say, frustrated. And as the mediator does that process, there is a level of awareness that moves in the direction that I think of Vedabasa, hope I pronounced your name right. It's a heightened level of awareness. And Ken talks about, it's not about compromise when you're doing mediation, because compromise, if you're taking something that's hot and something that's cold, is sort of maybe lukewarm. Mediation is really about taking multiple truths, recognizing that there's multiple truths. So the mediator will listen to each person. And as Ken actually said, as I'm listening, I will ask myself, what might be a bridge to for those multiple truths to be perhaps reconciled. And so the idea is for the multiple parts to be combined into something that yet is to be discovered, that yet may not exist. And we don't impose some resolution, we are discovering it as we are allowing people in a safe space to express themselves. And so the last thing I would just mention is, and I've mentioned this in context of collaborative practice, that the objective, and I think of mediation as well, is to create a safe container within which people can feel sufficiently comfortable to express their emotions, to express their needs. And because, as Stacy said, we've been so culturally conditioned not to express our needs, it will take us some time as mediators to get past those blocks. And we need to have patience, and we need to ask everybody in the room to have patience. And usually, in my experience, people do have enough patience, because they come to us as mediators because they want to resolve the problem. It's just a question of not knowing exactly how to do that. And we try to guide them in the direction of learning one from the other about what a possible resolution might look like. So that's, I hope that I've tied it into mediation, Vikram. That's what I would say initially.
Yeah,
And again,
these are initial comments. We'll further get, because the only thing what happened was I was trying to intervene. I put my hand up also because Lily got left out in talking about what non-violent communication means to her. So Lily, please, let's go to that first. Okay. Yes.
So I'm enjoying all of this and all the wonderful ideas that you're each presenting. And with Mark's initial introduction, that's exactly all the things that I learned. Everyone had some good ideas to bring into it. I think NVC, in my experience, absolutely is a holistic approach. And it does have, even though Marshall Rosenberg, I never heard him say the word mindfulness, it's definitely about being mindful of what's going on within you, with the other person. If you're a mediator, being mindful again of what's going on within you and the parties that you're mediating. And then I also believe part of this is our human interconnectedness. And then Stacy, yes, we've hit on this a couple times, said such an important thing. We are not raised in most of our societies to pay attention to our feelings. As a matter of fact, we might even be told there's no reason to feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. So there's a denial of feelings. So there's a big cutoff and disconnect from our own feelings, from other people's feelings. And then we've all probably heard of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this human interconnectedness, it is all about, we have basic needs. And if you, I call it, peel back the layers of the onion, behind any dispute usually is going to be some level of disconnection. People are feeling disconnected. And the idea is that we all have these basic needs. What are those needs? What needs aren't being met? And that in mediation, you peel back the layers, and this whole idea of not judging, of trying to observe, that kind of opens the door for understanding, oh, if I stop my judgment of you, I can see, oh, you do have some sort of valid need. And it might be very much a need I have right now or a need I have had. So the whole approach of Marshall Rosenberg's to be observing, not judgmental, look at the feelings and the needs. I find that this is very beneficial individually. And yes, Mark makes the great point. This is exactly what a mediator can do to bring into the room a level of awareness so that each person can then understand they both have these needs and how can they meet these needs.
Perfect. So Stacey, what we're going to do is, of course, you're going to talk about connected to mediation, but also when we talk about communication and nonviolent communication, first, are we going to start within ourselves? How we, first from the mediator's perspective, is there some nonviolent communication happening within the mediator? So I'm just giving thoughts out, please. So please connect it to mediation, and then we'll, yeah.
I like how it's been mentioned several times that communication starts with yourself. So I think you are having that ongoing awareness and then habit building of how you listen to yourself and how you speak to yourself. And that idea of self-compassion, I think, is really important. And there's a lot of good work being done on that by someone named Kristen Neff. And she has a lot of resources. And it is not the same as nonviolent communication, but I think it is another good tool to have. And it's very complementary, if not informed by that. And then in the mediation sense, I do think bringing it into mediation, having that level of awareness of judgment. And I'm going to speak of this more in as a facilitator in a facilitated conversation as opposed to a direct mediation. But bringing words for people, offering that up so people can hear that can be really important so they can examine it and think, does this apply to me or this situation or not? And so they can say yes or no, or kind of, and then clarify that back and forth that Mark was talking about, I think is really important. And then one more piece that has been bubbling up for me as everyone has been speaking is an idea of tolerance for our own physical feelings as we're going through all this. I think sometimes that's so painful, is as these emotional things are happening, we're having physical responses and we're seeing physical responses in others. And we also maybe don't always have an idea that is even happening or words for it. And so separating those physical discomforts with that the emotions bring. So, and I think that's important in a mediation, because that can lead people to need to separate themselves for a moment, or to get up, or to take a walk, or to react immediately to someone else. But what they're really reacting to, like we talked earlier, was things themselves are physically feeling, not even emotional. And the whole idea of tolerating our own emotion, feelings, and knowing it's not going to last forever, that has a cycle, and to kind of ride through it, but also others and allowing them that space to ride through those cycles, and then come back to the conversation, to pause for a little bit and realize that isn't the conversation. Those are things that are happening to get to the conversation. I know I just said a lot, but there's just so much going on. This is just fascinating, all that we're talking about. And tolerating that someone else's needs can be their needs and be completely different than ours, and doesn't invalidate our own needs, that we can have these two things that seem like there's no bridge, and we can hold them for a little while and see where it leads. We don't have to think because we don't see a path that there is no path. I think that's all vital in a mediation context.
Perfect. But with this, what are the forms of nonviolent communication without words? What are the other forms of nonviolent communication where words are not part of it?
Yeah, thank you. Like it has already been such a great learning experience listening to all of you. I will start with, as Vikram wanted me to talk about this whole idea of mediation and how we are using some of these tools and strategies of nonviolent communication. I start with my own little experience myself and my colleague Mansi's experience, a few online mediation, actual mediation experience using some of these strategies that I was talking about, the different elements of nonviolent communication, which we tried to use in our own practical experience of conducting this online mediation. So we felt that it actually helped in the transformation of the relationships. We were doing this mediation for an international organization. They were having people in different countries of Africa, and this was basically a conflict between some of these staff in these different countries, working in different countries of Africa. And we felt when we started talking about that, and at the end of the whole mediation process of this whole effort, in fact, all of them, almost 6 to 7 of them who were part of that whole conflict process, they requested us to have a special session for their entire, colleagues on nonviolent communication. And in fact, I was told that there has been definitely, and they were able to, what we are talking of a win-win situation, when we are talking of a transformation of the relationship. We really felt, because we are still in touch with some of these people with whom we actually took part in that mediation process. They have a totally different mindset, viewpoints on how they can handle conflict. Because anyway, conflict is part of our life. It is something organic. They're natural, bound to happen. But how we handle conflicts is something very important. So in that context, use of some of these strategies of nonviolent communication, as I said, that essence of openness and flexibility, humanization of the whole relationship, humanization of the communication process, overcoming or avoiding, getting out of that trap of stereotyping, because we felt initially there were a lot of issues of stereotypes. Someone who was from South Africa, someone from Burundi, and someone was from Zimbabwe. So they had a lot of issues related to each one of them. Some of them were getting into the trap of stereotyping. So how we avoid that, and also those important altruistic elements which are part of the nonviolent communication, the idea of forgiveness, idea of kindness, gratitude, and compassion and empathy. They are very important, and we felt that actually in the entire organizational architecture, some of these ideas have actually been able, we were able to weave in how they communicate using some of these ideas in their, day-to-day communication process. So I think there is a lot of scope. Possibly, I think all mediation courses or mediation training program, I feel, I'm sure all of you will agree that all of us need to work to introduce and ensure that nonviolent communication is a part of the whole training process of any mediator who is trying to become a mediator. I think that we need to work for that, and each one of us can contribute in that, I suppose, because each one of you are working in this area. So I think we could identify more people who are serious into this, and we could do some kind of an advocacy or something that in all mediation training program, this becomes an integral part, introduction and understanding of use of nonviolent communication and how we use in a mediation approach.
I think, Vedvas, I think made an important point. A mediator who's trying to be a mediator. I think that is the most crucial part. Mediators have to also try to be mediators. They're good. But tell me, Vedvas, my question was, what are the forms of nonviolent communication? You'll have to unmute yourself. Vedvas, can you hear me? I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. You are saying what are the forms of
nonviolent communication?
Yes, as I said, these different strategies and tools of elements of nonviolent communication, which I talked about right at the beginning. You know, those altruistic tendencies, avoidance of stereotypes.
I'm more onto forms. I don't know whether I'm getting the. I mean, if maybe I have to change the word if possible, but in the methods, more about methods. I don't know whether that's also the correct word. How do you communicate non-violently? What are the sources of it, and everything is different. How do you communicate? I'm trying to get to something which I will come to later, but I'm just trying to get it out of. If there's something on that, if you can tell me, is there something there with this?
You see, important aspect of method of non-violent communication is that whole intrinsic commitment to the essence of human interconnectedness, essence of mutual coexistence, and essence of how we can humanize our communication process.
No, what I'm saying with this thing is everything you've done everything inside yourself, everything. Now it's come out in words. You're in communicating in words. That's normally what happens. What are the other ways of communicating? All those aspects you've looked at, all those connecting to this and that and everything done. Now the communication part, I'm really interested. Have you looked at that aspect? What are the ways to communicate that?
Yes. Say, for instance, when we were talking to these people, in our own mediation work that we were doing with this international organization, like how we are approaching, like we had, of course, everything was online, but we had a pre-mediation session with each one of those parties who were in conflict, and we were trying to, bring them to some kind of a realization on how important was it to how they can work together as a team, and in that context how they can resolve that issue in which they had come, we were working with them, how it could be resolved in a very constructive manner. There came the importance of non-violent communication, like how, like sometimes we, the way we speak, as Mark was pointing out about the ideas of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. In fact, we all talk about this whole approach of how, non-violent communication, as Dr. Rosenberg has talked. It is how it is how we change from the usual way that we communicate, possibly, and reframe. Dr. Rosenberg's underlining point was reframing the whole way in which we communicate. So in that context, one second.
I think what we'll do is, of course, Lily, and maybe you can throw more light on this aspect. He said, Vedvya said that bring them to certain realization. He was sitting something. Now, bringing to realization, one is through whatever dialogue they were having. Beyond that, is there something else? Lily, is there something that you want to bring in that? Okay, like exactly this way. So now you're not, no words being used, but you're still communicating with us. That's the important part.
So what I was saying is that I feel it comes back to the energy. We talked about energy in that other talk. So when a mediator's in a room, they're bringing a certain energy, and of course the two parties or more are bringing an energy. But if we look at, I think Stacy mentioned feelings come and go. So the mediator has that sort of awareness of feelings are very transitory, but the two individuals that are in a dispute, they don't really see it that way. The feelings are very solid. They exist. They're not going away. So a mediator brings into that space this energy that all the feelings are acceptable, but they're transitory. They'll come and go. They'll be stronger or lighter. So along with that, the mediator also hopefully has the awareness that the more upset a person is, the stronger their feelings are, and probably the more pain they're in. And Marshall Rosenberg hit on this numerous times when I heard him speak, that the more horrific an act is, the more pain the person's in. So as I said, hopefully a mediator in a mediation, when somebody's really hot and really upset, they're able to understand they're in a deep amount of pain because of those feelings they're having and the needs that aren't being met. And so they can bring this energy into the room of openness and calmness, and that everything changes and shifts. And they, in that energy of that room, can become the healing source of more awareness for these individuals to then make their shifts from being in pain, their needs aren't being met, to having some awareness of how they can meet their needs. So I see it as that way. I see it as very much an energy that the mediator brings, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's the direction I wanted to go to without actually putting it in that direction. But the point is communicating. When we say heart to heart, we use that very casually, heart to heart. Let's have a heart to heart. But that communication, how does that happen? Is that part of it? Where do you get that going? And of course, that whole symposium was part of that. But soul to soul, I mean, all those things, aspects, how do we get to that point? I don't know who's going to throw light on that. Mark, are you going to throw light on that? Or Stacy, one of you, whoever?
I would go back to the fundamental point that is made in Marshall Rosenberg's work, is that it really is very much a communication from the heart. The idea of identifying your feelings and your needs is really very much at the essence of whether you call it your heart or whether you call it your soul or your essential needs. And essentially the idea is to enrich a person's life. So if your needs are not being met and you make a specific request of the other person, which is really the part that I think we may have not been dwelling on as much, but the idea of this process is to be able to eventually make a request that's not formed in a demand or as an ultimatum. It is that I feel a need for this. Can you help me meet that need? If I were to ask that from my heart of someone I felt was being insulting or angry or whatever toward me, I'm not going to create defensiveness. I might create opportunity for the other person to respond from the heart because I'm speaking from the heart. That's really what I think Marshall Rosenberg is talking about, is getting really to the core of Vikram, getting to the very heart of what is driving people and having the conversation from that level in order to enrich people's lives. I think that's really what he's talking about.
The thing is that you people are the people who read books and you do all that. So of course you'll bring that out. But what I'm trying to get to is that you connect to your heart and whatever other things, and then what comes out in terms of communication is through words. So you've connected to that, and the words are being transferred from here to there. I'm saying, is there something beyond that? Is there a communication happening in ways where you have connected and you've connected on the other side, and like Lily said, that some energy field connects that whole communication is happening on a different level altogether? Is that part of the whole concept, Stacey? Do you think there's some fits in somewhere? It's communicating. I mean, it's like a wireless communication. So then goes back to that symposium and the router and all those aspects of it. Are we bringing that in anywhere?
Well, I'll just take a stab at it, but this is just Lily, I saw you on mic, so why don't you go and then I'll go.
Both of you stay. Don't go. No one goes. Everyone stays. Yes, Lily.
Okay, so Stacy, here's what I was thinking, according to what Mark said, and because this is how I was trained, is so if we make this down to real life, and say I'm having an issue with my spouse, and we're newly married. We've been married a couple of years, and they're working a lot and they're being with their friends a lot, and I'm feeling very alone. So the way I would communicate with the nonviolent communication would be, I would say my feelings, my needs, and make my request, right? So my feeling might be, I'm very frustrated because you're never home anymore. And I sit here night after night and you're out having fun with your friends or you're working. I feel very disconnected from you. And it doesn't feel good. We're supposed to be married and it doesn't feel good. So right there, this person has communicated the feelings and the needs. So now maybe they're starting to calm down, hopefully, because if we get at the heart level, they need to be a little bit calm. In a mediator, the mediator would be mediating all this, but I'm just talking about two people talking. Then when you get to the request, the person could say, I'm wondering if you would be willing to, every Tuesday and Friday night would be our nights, and we could stay home or we could do something. How do you feel about that? Because that would really help me feel connected. So this is the heart to heart. This is the energy that you want to get to. So a person is expressing how they're feeling, what they're needing, and then how they can meet that need, if that makes sense. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, perfect. The words part of it. That words part of it. Yes, we're going.
Yeah.
I wanted to go beyond that. Stacey has something. She's going to stab. I don't know. She's talking about non-violent and she's stabbing and all. That stabbing is violent, Stacey. You don't stab. No stabbing.
Thank you for catching me on that. I think I have a lot of violent language. So I really like that point of energy. And I think often in a mediation or a facilitation setting, a lot of what we do, whether we realize it or not, is almost be a thermostat and kind of help bring temperatures up or down in the room as needed. And that is not a verbal thing. That is a sense of what's going on and where people are at, or even bringing awareness to, it's not a control thing. I know a thermostat is a control, but it's more of just an awareness and letting people know that is what they're feeling and helping them tune in. But I do think watching someone who's been very upset calm down is a nonverbal for themselves and other people in the room to pay attention. And so allowing people to realize there are rhythms and to see them can be a nonverbal way to signal what is going on. And if they understand it's a process, these physical feelings that go with their emotions come and go, it really can help them hang on to their own things to be ready to hear and to speak. So I think there's a lot going on that is not verbal. This requires verbal, but there is a lot more that's going on. And even things with body posture and talking and that gets complicated because people should be allowed to have the posture they want to have, and it may look defensive, but they may need that for a little bit. But to give people the freedom to do that and to have their process, and give ourselves the freedom to have that process. And I think all that then can contribute into the things that are said, but there's a lot going on that is unsaid.
Yes. Yes. There's anything on this aspect?
Yeah, actually, when we are talking of the whole idea of heart to heart or soul to soul communication, we must realize that non-violent communication is also the essence of showing your love, your affection, and the warmth in the relationship in your communication. If there is a warmth in your own communication process, sorry. So it actually helps in connecting. Non-violent communication is essentially also of how we connect with each other, how we are trying to understand each other's point of views and how we empathize with them. That is the key. And that is how, when the mediator is trying to maneuver her or his way using some of these techniques, it will help create as Lily was talking, or the others, Stacey was talking about, that energy. It brings in a very, very good positive energy, positive vibration in the whole mediation table. And I think that is an important aspect of the whole way of how we can, integrate the ideas of nonviolent communication in the, mediation process.
I'm
So
just trying to
I
open up
think
the
that
discussion.
is very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Positive
You
vibration,
have to open it up.
positive appreciation.
Yeah, a lot of factors. We have to open that up because Mark is ready to open it up. Yes, Mark, please open it up for us.
You know, I wanted to come back to something that Henry Kalsi talked about in his talk. He put together a series of lists of basic needs. Rosenberg has put together a similar list, and on Henry's list is connection. And when I heard Lily describe her case in point that she was talking about, I feel very disconnected from you. And then I hear Betty Bias talk about help in connecting and how we connect. Connection is a universal need. We all feel that need. So that if I express a need for connection, it will come across, it should come across to another person who shares a similar need for connection to understand that. And, you know, when I was thinking about reaching the higher level, Vikram, that you were talking about, I do believe that a shared understanding and a shared recognition of each other is a higher level than what the people came in with. And so I do think that we can look toward shared understanding or some form of understanding, an expression of understanding as an accomplishment, a higher level than what the people may have come in with. And that's really very much the part of this process that after the back and forth of the expression of interest and needs and so forth, is that notion of recognition of the other person. In the book Transformative Mediation, the promise of mediation, they talk about recognition as half of the process. One part is empowerment, the other part is recognition. So I think this idea of understanding is critical and essential to what we're trying to do in the process of nonviolent communication.
Perfect. But maybe I'm taking into a direction which maybe you people don't want it to go. Maybe there is a certain non-violent communication concept because of the fact that I don't read, because Vedvyas has sent me his material long time back, but Stacy has to hop off. She's after stabbing everyone, she wants to hop off. Okay, perfect.
Stacey, okay. Nice to see you, Stacy.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Take care.
Bye,
I
Stacy.
look
Please
forward to
drop.
seeing the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, please drop in for other sessions also. Yep. Bye. So that material that Vedvyas sent, I've never been able to go through. So I'm just trying to see that is there some other discussion around it that we can create, and then the concept of non-violent communication, can we enlarge that whole concept? Because I think what you people have spoken about, of course, connecting to certain aspects of yourself and it coming from that. Where are you coming from, kind of thing. The other is, of course, you coming from there, but are you going to be able to reach someone else and that portion without a channel which is a normal channel that you normally use, which is of course words, maybe gestures, of course. I mean, words with touching someone's hand and all that, of course those who could be part of it, but a stage beyond that, which of course you've understood what I'm saying. I think you people got that. So if there's anything on that part of it, or because I think on the non-violent communication as we understand it, I think we've kind of covered that. So in the mediation, I think we've kind of covered that. If there's anything else you want to bring in, Lily, is there something that you want to bring in?
So the only last point that I made some notes last night was regarding Marshall Rosenberg and what he taught, which is totally, of course, about feelings and needs, is in one of his talks, he said that he and his wife were having a difficult conversation and it wasn't going well. And right in the middle of it, his wife said, "Do you love me?" And he said, "When?" And she said, "Right now." And he says, "Not really." And the whole audience laughed. And so this is the point, is that these feelings do come and go. And we want to certainly take them seriously, but not so seriously as that we think that they're the God's given truth of all of our experience. And so Marshall was trying to make the point that when you're in a dispute with someone, or maybe you're the mediator doing a dispute, that these strong feelings, they can easily be understood and worked through with the awareness. And again, it goes all the way back to mindfulness and the energy that you bring into the room. And we won't always feel positive toward that person if it's an individual dispute. And we have to recognize that, and then recognize that that's okay. that it's okay because it changes. And the mediator, I think, is the person in a mediation who can bring that without words to the table, and in hearing both the people create that space where then they're willing to hear the other person. By listening to each person's issues and reflecting them back, the mediator creates the space where the other person might now be able to hear what the other person feels and needs. And that, I think, is the crux of NVC. And then it goes to the request, as I was mentioning, and Mark mentioned that too.
How I'm looking at it is that there are like, of course, you said connection. There's a deeper connection. Sometimes to bring out that deeper connection into words does not happen sometimes. So from the mediator's perspective, if you want to put everything out in words, you might not, I mean, like what you just said, I mean, do you love me? You're not even thinking about it, and you say no, then whole concept changes. But deeper connection is there. You don't need to put words to it. So I'm trying to work something out here where we can put out this concept that there are certain aspects which maybe are not required to be put out in the normal verbal communication, which might actually go against the process sometimes. I don't know. These are just thoughts. I don't know. Vedvyas, any thoughts on this? Because we focus a lot on the communication, but sometimes there are deeper connections which already are communicated. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's making sense also. It's just these are just
definitely. Sometimes there are, as you rightly pointed out, the deeper connections, and how we go to the beneath the surface level when we are talking of mediation, when we are trying to unearth what were the major reasons possibly on why particular conflict had occurred in the first place, how we can make that deeper connection with, say, those who are at conflict and the conflicting parties, and try to see how we can transform their conflict into something which is promotion of emotional bridge building. The job of the mediator, when she or he is trying to use the tools of nonviolent communication, is he or she is trying to actually do a job of emotional bridge building, and try to promote that plug that trust deficit, if in case there were, or some of these issues between the two. So in that context, how non-violent communication or use of that, and we can actually help in making those deeper connections, is always a challenge, of course. So of course, and also what is important here is that if I'm saying that I'm trying to use non-violent communication, it doesn't come like that. It has to come from a series of practice. I always tell in my training sessions, the first thing is that I can't give you any formula, A plus B equals to C, and you become a non-violent communication. No, it is the deep commitment, the deep sincere, utmost sincerity on the part of the person, whether I am an individual or a mediator or whosoever. If I am able to use non-violent communication in actual practice, that is the key. That deeper connection with my own self-communication, myself, also a sense of the self-compassion, self-empathy. Because if I can't empathize with myself, how I can do empathy, be empathetic to the others. So these are important areas that we need to work, but just by training programs possibly it doesn't happen. It is basically over a period of time, when we start nurturing them in the right way, we are able to do. And when we are able to bring into a mediation platform, mediation table, some of these attributes which we are talking about, possibly it helps, as we again go back to that thing, a new kind of a positive vibration that happens. We are able to connect with those with whom we are working with. And that is important. If you are not able to establish the deep connection, it's very difficult to, we may not be able to get what we are trying to look for.
Yeah, because look, thing is that we are talking about mediation, and in my case, I am talking about dispute resolution, not conflict resolution. So, because you are here to assist parties to resolve the dispute, assist them. So, in that kind of a situation, just the fact that you yourself are able to gauge certain things, there is a communication happening with you without any verbal aspect of it. So there is a communication happening through heart, soul, whatever spirituality, everything, all those elements, whatever names you might give it, energy. Lily says and about energy, all that is happening. So there is a certain communication. Now you can, I mean, is the mediator gauging all that and doesn't require words for it? I'm just trying to move a little bit away from words, because I sometimes feel the focus becomes on, okay, communicate what you have, put it down on the table. I'm saying, can we move away from that? And I'm not saying that it can happen everywhere. Some parts of the world, maybe those are the important aspects of it. Everything has to be put in words, only then are you really communicating. But I want to move away from that, only because trying to develop something which is a global concept. And if your humanistic approach to mediation, that aspect of it's a global concept that you're trying to develop. So same way with the communication part of it, that aspect of connecting on that other level, and then being able to help them reach a certain resolution without actually those words being transferred from here to there. I'm going on the same route. I don't know if somewhere, please, Mark, help me. Come up to something. You're
Well,
the
yeah,
man
yeah.
who reads.
But you're triggering a concept that I think a lot of people have been talking about, Vikram. It is the chemicals in our brains that are triggered, that flow when we are feeling a sense of compassion, we're feeling a sense of connection, we are increasing neurotransmitters like oxytocin and serotonin. Those kinds of things that are happening within our brains are the same things that happen. Let's say you fall in love, your brain is flooded with these things. Well, when you are feeling like you're moving from a state of real, awful, terrible, visceral conflict into a state of possible resolution, I think that what's happening physically within our brains is we're actually feeling a sense of relief, but also a sense of reward, because physically we are no longer stuck in that rut of having to protect ourselves and to be consumed by our own self-centeredness. Because when we get into conflict, the first thing we do is we retreat inside ourselves to protect ourselves. And so if the mediator can help initially, and you see, we're talking about a phased process that takes a significant, I think, effort and some time. But I do think that at the point where you're, I think, getting to, Vikram, let's say the nonverbal place, or the part that could be expressed in some ways beyond words, I do think that there's a physical chemical reaction within ourselves that happens when we are reaching a point of feeling the relief of a possible resolution, feeling a relief that I'm feeling understood. I'm feeling something that's a physical feeling that's informed by the chemicals within myself and within my brain. So I think that, and there's a lot of attention being paid to those. I know Ken has written, I think, an article a long time ago, Bringing Oxytocin into the Room, I think was the title. But the idea is to talk about the neurochemistry involved here. And it's a fascinating subject. The other thing I just want to mention is that in the foreword to Rosenberg's book, there's a point that they talk about nonviolence being a way of life, but there's also a point where there's a quote: nonviolence means allowing the positive within you to emerge. And if you take a look at that comment, what we're really assuming is that people are by nature understanding, loving, compassionate, and caring. That's an assumption that we're making about human nature. And what we're doing is we're taking every possible step we can in the process to allow that positive nature to emerge after we've moved through all of the stuff that goes on with the violent or judgmental or evaluative types of language that we speak to ourselves. We're really getting to a point where we're really trying to get people to that point where they're sharing their nature as loving, caring, compassionate human beings.
Perfect. I think Vedvya has to leave. He has some guests. So Vedvya, any kind of a closing, concluding, something that you want to leave some thoughts with us?
Yes, in fact, it would be wonderful if we can in some way or the other, and
Is that violent communication or non-violent? What is it?
Non-violent communication, non-violent. How we can bring this non-violent communication as something which is part of the whole mediation training process. That is something which will be of interest to me, I think. I really feel it could be a global initiative to do that, because it really will bring a lot of change in the way we communicate while mediating. So it can really bring in
but
very
do you know-
positive results.
But with this, you don't use the word training with me. You say, okay, a skill development program for mediation in which non-violent communication forms a part of it. That is what you have to say.
Yes,
Because
that's right. Perfect. Perfect. That's
So
right.
so
I
we
agree
have
with
to,
you.
look, I'm putting together a structure there. We'll put this part of that.
Yes,
We'll
yes,
discuss
yes,
it.
yes.
We'll discuss this definitely.
Yes,
So
yes. So if you allow me, if I am allowed to leave, because as I said, some guests are there and they're waiting for me for the dinner.
thank you, Vedvyas, for joining us. And definitely, we'll
Thank
stay
you.
in touch.
And let us all remain in touch. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes,
Thank you
sure.
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, Mark. So, okay. So this is an area which definitely for me requires a whole, I don't know whether study is required or is it just to be able to open your mind to it and move away from what communication is, what it means to people. I think we need to expand that first, because obviously you people read all this and you've got certain theory in you. Whether these aspects have come out in that, I don't know. But Lily has something to say. Lily, please, Lily, throw some light. Show us the light, please.
Well, I really liked what Mark said about the assumption that humans have a positive nature within them. I certainly believe that, and it is a caring, compassionate person. I think that part of us gets disconnected because of unmet needs, and people just are not connected to that, so they don't have that sort of energy. And again, I think a mediator brings that to the room by even just their demeanor and the vibe they're putting out. The other people can feel that. So I think always looking back to the needs is super important. And Marshall Rosenberg said another interesting thing, that the most horrific thing a person does, the deeper pain that they're in, and I would say the deeper disconnection they feel. So when we recognize that, it all comes down to needs and unmet needs. And once those needs are met, that person's nature does become very caring and compassionate. It's because their needs aren't met. And so if we can become more mindful and aware of the needs by observing both our own and others, I think that would be a huge step for mankind, honestly.
What one step that sharing is not happening of my post, that step for mankind you're not taking. What about the larger thing will happen when it happens? No, but the only thing is you're saying there's that person, that's that whatever, that human being sitting inside, and to be able to communicate with that is what is the important thing. And to communicate with that, it has to be on a non-violent basis. That's the only communication that aspect understands. Maybe I don't know. Yes, Mark. So the one, okay, Lily kind of concluded. Lily, anything else that you want to add to that? She's concluded. So Mark, it was your topic. Now it is your conclusion. With no conclusion, I'm saying closing. Conclusions will never happen. If we conclude, what are we going to do after that?
Right. So I come back to a very fundamental point, that judgment as such is a form of violence. And that's essentially what I think we're talking about here. And when we look at the established ways that our governments and our legal systems are resolving disputes, it's basically by judgment. And if that's the case, then we're essentially subjecting people within the legal process to a form of violence. When we get away from that, and we're talking about what happens between person A and person B and the mediator, and we have, let's say, the idea of the three chairs, so to speak. Now we're looking at the actual people. We're looking at human nature. We're looking at what drives people, what makes people tick, so to speak. And then I think we can really talk about nonviolent communication. Because as I said when we first started out, when I feel like somebody is to blame for the way I feel, that's me judging the other person immediately and automatically. And what I think, Vikram, you just talked about in terms of how to actually get to this point, it's actually a way of life. So I don't profess to be doing this all day long, but I do say that if I want to improve myself, I want to be more in touch with what is driving my feelings and my judgment about another person when I'm engaged either in a conflict myself or in a mediation, to do what Ken suggested. If I feel like I'm judging someone, to ask myself, what would have to happen to me in order for me to get there? So I could then ask that person some questions that would maybe help to inform me about what may be going on with that person. So I do think that it's an extremely valuable tool. And as I said when I first started out, I'm starting to really get so energized about collecting the tools from the toolboxes that so many wonderful mediators have brought out here, including nonviolent communication, including what Henry Ampolsky has described in his book, including what Ken has talked about, and many, many other people. I think that's really the direction we should be going in, is gathering up the tools so that mediators can be much better equipped when they get into conflict, to be flexible and responsive to the needs in the moment of whatever may be happening in that conflict. So that's I think NVC is one of those tools for the toolbox.
Perfect. I think what I need, like I was talking about what Vedvyas was telling me today, that we should create a publication kind of thing. So maybe in a simplified form, a toolbox which is a very simplified thing. It's not the larger theoretical academic things. If we can remove that, because it has to go down to people who otherwise would maybe not even know about mediation, and we have to inspire them, connect with it, and later if they want to pick up more material, let them pick up more material, but a very simplified connection there. So that is what has to be worked on, and all of you have to help me work on that. So I think maybe some summarization of sessions, which of course, Mark, you're good at. I'm sure Lily's good at that. She writes books. So something that like that also, you people please have to contribute there. Yes.
I have one last thing to say. So I actually have written a book, but it's not published yet, called Building Bridges to Connection, the key to the toolbox. And I go through like 9 tools that we use. And the key is curiosity, which, Mark, I'm sure you will completely be able to relate to, because in NVC, it really is all about being curious about what people feel and need. So whenever the book is out, Mark, I'll contact you and let you know. Vikram, I won't let you know because I know you don't read books.
No, but you have to get in touch with me, because we have to do that on Talking Books. We have to talk about the book on Talking Books.
We will when it's published, I will.
Yes, perfect. So thank you very much. Always a pleasure speaking to both of you. And of course, please drop in for other sessions. There's some interesting ones coming. I was just telling Lisa today also that Baruch Bush on transformative mediation, that's happening on 29th. Okay. That was very nice of him to agree to do that. So that'll be nice. Of course, Bernie Mayer is coming on Saturday on neutrality. And Michael Lang is also there on Saturday. So that he's also come out with a very interesting topic. What is it, Mark? What is the topic that Michael Lang has put out? The journey is on, the path to excellence. So Saturday also is interesting things happening. Every day. Tomorrow there's mediation in criminal cases. That profession. Oh, okay. So lots happening. So please drop in. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Vikram.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Lily.
And in saying goodbye, I did want to thank you again. You really have just been such a positive impact on my life for doing all this. So thank you for all your efforts.
No, thank you for being
and nice to see
you. And we'll keep seeing Mark. We'll keep seeing Mark.
You.
All right. See you.